Well, good evening to see you all this evening. Good to have you here. We're going to get a wealth of knowledge tonight, and we are looking forward to hearing some good recommendations. Already had a couple of upfront conversations with our speakers, and if we could only have 6 hours instead of just 45 minutes, right? Okay, but. Okay, so it's good to see everybody tonight, and we are going to open as usual with a word of prayer. And John, are you the one who's going to lead us? Okay.
Heavenly Father, I just pray that you would be with our politicians, our national, state, local politicians, legislatures especially, Lord. I pray that this would be a season of truth. Lord, that your word of truth would be known to people, but not just your word, Lord. I pray that you would shine the light of truth on election integrity, the light of truth on what happened in COVID, truth, Lord, about DEI, our national debt, the issues that are facing this nation, Lord. They can only be resolved by you, Father. And so we put our faith and trust in you, Lord, and we pray that everywhere that you would expose the truth so that our politicians would be making legislation and laws based on truth, not on deception that we have been getting from Satan. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hi, thank y'all for having me. I'm going to talk about constitutional amendments and why they are the absolute most important elections. They're more important than presidential elections. They are more important than local races. Constitutions are legal binding contracts and trust compacts in which the people confer limited grants of authority to trustees and agents in government to act on our behalf. This is made clear in Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution, which declares that government is founded on the authority of the people, and we have the right to alter and reform government in whatever manner we think most expedient. And Article 1, Section 29 declares that all laws contrary to the Constitution are void. It is vitally important that we use wisdom and discernment when granting authority to government through constitutional amendments, because whatever ends up in the constitutions is nearly impossible to remove, especially if it benefits government. We must look farther than the summary that will appear on the ballot about the constitutional amendment and instead examine the language of the resolution that created the amendment proposition to see what language is actually going to end up in the Constitution. For example, on Proposition 2, that deals with taxes on realized and unrealized capital gains, the ballot language looks great. However, when you look deeper, you see that this amendment will actually strengthen the authority for our agents to tax unrealized gains on our properties, because they've created a caveat that says that property tax is not included in those unrealized gain prohibitions. This is something the people have stated that we want to eliminate with property taxes, and they are strengthening the language for it. People are being taxed out of their homes due to unrealized gains in the value that are often overestimated. This authority should not be strengthened in our Constitution. I propose that we should vote no on this amendment. Also, Proposition 12 about the Commission on Judicial Conduct actually strengthens the idea that only government can hold itself accountable, which is an absurd usurpation of the people's power to alter or reform our government, as declared in Article 1, Section 2. This vital right was completely gutted just 2 years after the Republic of Texas became one of the United States. Without fanfare, without revolt, this usurpation started not in the legislature, it started in the courts. In Hosner versus DeYoung, 1847, the Supreme Court of Texas declared that the common law principle that the king can do no wrong applied to the government, giving them sovereign immunity. Despite the clear evidence laid out in our founding documents that the United States and Texas, it is in fact the people that are sovereign, not government. James Madison in Federalist number 46 said the federal and state governments are in fact the different agents and trustees of the people. Georgia Constitution Article 1 Section 2 states public officers are the trustees and servants of the people and are at all times amenable to them. There are over 30 references in the state constitutions to agents, servants, or trustees, offices of trust, or the public trust. And offices of trust are mentioned 4 times in the U.S. Constitution. How can a servant, agent, or trustee ever be sovereign over the source of their authority? And as stated in Article 1, Section 2, in Texas, it is the people that have all political power. Government is instituted on our authority. We were always intended to have the right to hold government trustees accountable to our Constitution. Because of this egregious act, we have a self-serving, out-of-control government today. The people should not capitulate to a tiny place on a committee to hold government accountable, but should fight fully to restore the power declared in Article 1, Section 2 of the people. Lastly, with Proposition 15, and this is a very important one, dealing with the rights of parents. If you read the resolution that actually is going to create the new language, you will see more diminishment of our liberty, not the protection that the ballot wording promises. The new language of the Constitution will state, the state or a political subdivision shall not interfere with the rights of the parents. Hey, that's great. If they stopped there, this would have been a great amendment that would have reinforced our liberty interest in our children. But they didn't stop there. Instead, they added at the end of this sentence the word unless. Unless. The government's not going to interfere with your right of a parent unless the interference is essential to further a compelling government interest. Well, what is a compelling government interest? Who gets to decide when the government has a compelling government interest? It'll be the government that decides. Article 1, Section 29 states that our liberty is inviolate by government. It is off limits to government interference, no matter what they think their compelling interest is. That includes our children, which, as I stated, are your liberty interest. And Article 1, Section 19 declares that the only way our liberty can be interfered with is through due process of law, which means a trial by a jury of your peers, not by government. The term compelling government interest or compelling state interest is not found anywhere in the U.S. Constitution or any one of the 50 states, or any one of the 50 state constitutions. So where does that term come from? Like the term sovereign immunity, it is a term made up by the courts to subvert and diminish your liberty. This contradicting notion that the people only have rights unless there is a compelling state interest first appeared in a U.S. Supreme Court case in 1963 with NAACP versus Button, and later spread to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals in 1989 in Texas v. Johnson. This egregious usurpation of our liberty should never be acknowledged in our Constitution and especially not concerning our precious children, we should vote no. I wrote a short report outlining my views on each of the amendments that will be posted on the Equal Forum's website under meeting resources. At the top of each proposition, I put a link that will actually take you to the language of the resolution so you can read it for yourself. I will also stay after the meeting, so if you have any questions, please come and talk to me. Thank you all so much for having me.
I really appreciate getting invited back. I guess I get up here about every year, maybe every 2 years. It's always a delight. Y'all are one of the better activist groups that I ever see here or Montgomery County. I hate to admit it, but I think the first time I ever spoke before this group, I had lots of hair and it had some color. So it's been a while going back in time.
White's a color.
White's a color. There you go. Or it's the absence of color. I'm not sure which. So anyway, they keep sliding off. I do have some business cards. Like Kristen said, I'll stay up here as long as anybody wants to talk about it. I will say right off the bat, and Kristen and I have talked about this, we don't really agree on every single one of these amendments. And part of the reason for that is just, smart people can disagree on difficult issues. But part of it is also that there's a lot of these that are just kind of milquetoast, or they're not written very clearly, or they're not that big of a deal in the overall scheme of things. There's a lot of reasons for that. And it doesn't mean we're in disagreement on the basic principles and all those sorts of things. Let me set my timer going so I don't run too much over, Dale. I'm kind of noted for that, unfortunately, so y'all might have to bear with me just a bit. Or not. I always just cut my mic off. I want to say a couple of things. Betty mentioned cataract surgery. Okay, this is kind of weird at a political meeting, but I was getting ready to go to the Middle East about 2 months ago on a job, and I was supposed to go to Alaska right after that on vacation, and I couldn't see all that well. And long story short, we got with the eye doctors and set up cataract surgery really fast. I mean, like first appointment to first surgery was only about 2 or 3 weeks. Got both eyes worked on. If anybody is even thinking about doing it, don't wait. It's the most amazing thing I've ever had happen to me. Not to spend a lot of time on it, but it's truly been life-changing. And I can read again, even in dim light. I can see distances again, all without glasses. It's been really remarkable. Only took about 10 minutes to do the surgery. Somebody mentioned Trump getting out of wars, trying to save people's lives. The place I was going was Azerbaijan. Most of y'all probably never heard of Azerbaijan. That's one of these wars that they've been warring with Armenia. And that's one that officially has only been going on 30 years or so, or 35 years. But the reason it's only officially been going on for 30 to 35 years is the whole area used to be part of the Soviet Union. And so officially it didn't become independent until then. So they didn't count the hundreds of years that the Armenians and the Azeris have been fighting. And it's been a very, very long, very intractable kind of thing. Well, Trump he didn't get credit for something that's been going on for hundreds of years. But, obviously he does want to end wars. Y'all all seen what Doge discovered? Everything is far worse than even I imagined, and I worked as chief of staff in Austin for a while. That will change your outlook on government, to say the least. But it's far worse than even I thought, even after that kind of experience. Have we heard of a bunch of Doge discoveries in Texas yet? I haven't.
Nope.
Have we heard of a whole lot of Doge implementations in D.C.? I haven't.
we heard of a lot of things discovered by Doge, but there's been very few monetary-wise that have actually taken place. Two more quick things before I get into the actual amendments. Several people mentioned water, and that's real near and dear to my heart, being a director of this RWA at this point. MUDs basically survive on bonds, at least most of them do. And once the bonds get passed, typically they're a 30-year bond, and you can't get out from under it. It's classified as what's called a municipal bond, and it's not even like a mortgage. With a mortgage, you can pay off principal early and shorten the term of the bond and all that sort of thing. On munis, it doesn't work that way. If you try paying off early, all you're doing is paying interest off early. You're not paying principal off early. So it's a really bad deal for taxpayers. In the case of the water authorities, like the one I'm a director of, the part that's really egregious, at least most MUDs, you get to vote on whether or not your subdivision is going to have this bond increase. In the case of the water authorities, we've got about 150 MUDs underneath us that we basically write the rules for. We don't have to go to the voters for approval of these bonds. It takes 3 directors of a board of 5 can sell unlimited amounts of bonds. And what has happened over the years, I've voted against them since I've been there, but what has happened over the years since before some of us got in is they have piled up nearly $3 billion worth of bond debt. $3 billion, and you can't get out from under it. I mean, it's going to run its course. Most of them are callable after 10 years, but you don't really have any money to call them with either. 80% of our budget right now, 80% is interest on the bonds. We make the federal government look good, if that's possible. Okay. Anyway, last thing, and I have to mention this because it is so egregious, and it's really timely what Christian said about our rights. How many people heard what Tim Kaine said yesterday or today about your rights? How many have heard it? A few of you did. He basically came out publicly, very publicly, and said our rights, inherent God-given rights, don't come from God. They come from government. No, I'm absolutely serious. Now think about this. This guy was almost the vice president of the United States. He barely lost when Trump won in 2016. And he's saying government is the source of all rights. You know what's even worse than that, in my opinion? Have you heard any electeds complaining about what he said? It's been crickets. Certainly from the Democrats. Absolutely zero that I've heard from the Democrats. And I've only heard of 2 cases of Republicans calling him out on it. Nationwide. Well, you can add 3. I'm a Republican, so I'll call him out on it. But
Cruz did, didn't he?
Cruz did.
did Cruz do it too? Okay, well that's 3 then.
In the Senate.
And who?
He did it in chambers.
Oh, okay. But, I mean, the fact that the guy would even say that, and he doesn't just get run out of the Senate is I don't know, it's just mind-boggling to me. Anyway, let's get into the things you came here for. You should have a piece of paper in front of you right now. This is for your use. Mark it up. Don't turn it back in, anything like that. Now, let me explain the columns a little bit. The first one's obviously what my considered opinion is, and I'll tell you in a couple of those cases, it's a pretty squishy decision one way or another. The next 2 are a couple of groups I was consulting that it's not actually been released publicly yet what they're voting on, so I couldn't say who the group was, but they're conservative groups that I'm sure you would know about. And then the third is TPR, and they're a conservative policy group out of the Dallas area, not to be confused with TPPF in the Austin area, but they're very similarly minded. I would add one thing that I've noticed over the years, in part having worked in Austin, is that the groups that are really the faces of the activism, like TPPF or TPR or Texas Values or Texas Right to Life, all those kind of groups, they tend to pull punches a little bit. And it's because they have to live with these legislators for years on end. And they sometimes will not say everything that maybe you and I might say about a particular bill, because they don't want the author getting mad at them and torpedoing things for 4, 5, 6 terms down the road.
Right.
Which actually, is that right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that actually happens. So you'd be amazed at how many votes are personal vendettas and not really statesman-like looking at the issues. Anyway, let's get into the actual stuff that I prepared here. Oh, yeah, this is kind of applies to everything. It's kind of a tradition of mine. Oh, what a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. Kind of a related one is from Sun Tzu that says, in war, everything is deception. And we've got a culture war going on. And the problem is Republicans don't necessarily understand we're in a culture war. And the other side is going to do absolutely everything they can to get whatever they can through, even if it's outright deception. They're not allowed to just lie about the amendments quite as much as they used to be 10, 20 years ago. That's been tightened up a little bit. They mean more what they say now on the ballot. But you're not actually voting on the legislation, as Kristen pointed out. You're voting on the language on the ballot, and that really doesn't matter. So glad you pointed that out. That's a great point. Some of the things that I considered as part of this, I won't say it's an exhaustive list, but looked up and studied the underlying legislation, see what different groups, including the Texas legislature, the sponsors, the committees that considered them, see what they said about the underlying bills, as Kristen was talking about. One of the questions to ask yourself, is it a lobbyist bill? And how many want to vote for a lobbyist bill in here? Maybe I should ask the question a little differently. If you had a choice, would you vote for a lobbyist-driven bill? Well, that was pretty wimpy. Would you vote for a lobbyist-driven bill? No! That's a little bit better. Okay? Next thing to consider, does this grow government? And that can be a tricky one. Sometimes it's easy. It's just an outright expenditure. Sometimes it's not so obvious. Let's say they change the rules on something. And the official report from the legislature said this isn't going to cost a penny. Is that accurate? No. Of course not. It's never accurate. And I'll tell you why. Because when they change the rules on something, there's going to be a new department or maybe a new agency that's going to pop up to look over this new rule change. You follow me? So maybe there's no actual outlay for buying something. There's a new department, a new part of the bureaucracy that's going to spring up, and it's going to be there forever. Okay, so who would vote for bills that grow government? No, I should say that the other way around. Would you vote for bills that grow government? No. Much better. Okay. Is this particular amendment limited to one or a very few special interests, or is it universal? We're talking about constitutional amendments. So should we vote for something, no matter how good it sounds, that's only going to affect 8 people in the state of Texas? No, I'm not exaggerating. When I was chief of staff, we had one exactly like that. And that was one of the questions I asked the author, is how many people does this affect? And the answer was literally 8. So So let me ask it again. Would you vote for something, for a constitutional amendment that only affected a very small number of people in Texas? No, you shouldn't. Does it protect individual rights? That one can be kind of tricky, as Kristen pointed out, because some of them sound great, and they may, in fact, be what they say, but there can be hidden agendas hidden in these things, particularly if you go back and the underlying legislation is radically different than what's on the ballot. And there's a lot of leeway in what they put on the ballot versus the underlying legislation. Does it protect the government? And that seems like a strange question, but is that possible that these amendments could actually make the government stronger?
Yes.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. And that's kind of what Kristen said on 15, I think it was. The next two kind of go together. Is you need to ask yourself, why is this particular constitutional amendment, even if it sounds like a great deal, why is it a constitutional amendment? Why can't they just do it as an ordinary bill? Okay? Because if they do it as an ordinary bill, goodness knows we don't need to be adding to the Texas Constitution. Every time you add something, the courts have to interpret it, and it's not a good thing. Closely related to that, is this really a Texas statewide issue, or is this a local issue? And I'll show you some examples of amendments that sound like a great idea, but fundamentally they're trying to fix a very bad local situation with what I think is a bad amendment. And I don't think bad law can trump bad judges, for example. So anyway, let's go on. There's some other things too. Who's funding it? All that sort of thing. Last thing, remember, this is still my opinion. The Matrix has a few other opinions, but this is still just my considered opinion. Okay, first one, Proposition 1. Creation of the Permanent Technical Institution Infrastructure Fund. If it's a really long name, that's probably not a good sign to begin with. And the available workforce education fund to support the capital needs of educational programs offered by the Texas State Technical College System. Pretty long one, okay? Now, is there anything wrong with funding higher education? Probably not. I don't think it's as valuable as it used to be. Should we fund more technical education? Yeah, maybe, but how about it paying for itself? How about them providing degrees that actually provide a payback when the student finishes and doesn't leave the cost on the taxpayer? I have heard, anecdotally, I haven't had time to verify this, that the Texas State Technical College System does some good things in terms of teaching people, technical trade type things, but they do an absolutely horrible job of managing money. So do we want to guarantee them money? That's not a good combination. Here's one of the things, I think I told y'all about this 2 years ago. The Texas Ledge, and they did it 2 years ago far more than they did this year, but they did it in several places this year. If they make a funding issue a constitutional amendment, guess what that does? It takes it out of the budget process when you're considering how much more they can spend 2 years later. Yeah, I mean, Braden's shaking yes.
Correct.
Okay, so this could be billions and billions of dollars out of the plus or minus 300 the state budget is now. But if it's put in the constitutional amendment side, it doesn't count as to the growth numbers, the growth caps that we're supposedly operating under. So why couldn't this be funded with an ordinary bill under HB or SB1? Well, of course it could. Okay? But doing it this way, it's a permanent funding source, and it takes it off of out from under the budget caps.
Correct.
Okay? Really, really bad kind of deal. And for that reason, sorry?
Makes it look better.
Makes them look better. Yeah, it says, oh, look at what a great job. We stayed within the spending caps. Well, maybe technically they did, but they got stuff like this going on. And if y'all remember, there were about 7 or 8 2 years ago that did exactly that. That could have been funded through just ordinary budget process. And by the way, there's a column on your sheet at the far right, so if you agree or disagree or want to look up more information or whatever, go ahead and write on that sheet and see what it is. Proposition 2, no tax on capital gains. The constitutional amendment prohibiting the imposition of a tax on the realized or unrealized capital gains of an individual, family, estate, or trust. And this is one that I very politely, respectfully disagree with Kristen on a little bit. The origin of this one is something that happened in Washington State. And Washington State is not known as a conservative bastion, if you ever follow what goes on in Washington State. And what they did is they literally put a wealth tax in place. And you probably heard that floated at the national level, and it gets thrown down because nobody wants to do that. But if you have a wealth tax, then any capital gain, whether you realize it or not, whether it's handed down generationally or you did it yourself, any kind of wealth is subject to tax by the government. And we don't want that ever anywhere in the United States. But Washington State passed it. And this was proposed as a preemptive strike to keep something like that from happening in Texas. Now, it's got the property tax exclusion in there. The reason for that is that we already, like it or not, are being taxed on unrealized gains on our property. That's already in place. And in order to get this preemptive strike against a Washington-style wealth tax, in order to get the votes, they couldn't leave property tax included in this, or they didn't have the votes to pass it. It's really that simple. So it's maybe lesser of two evils, I think, to go ahead and vote for this one, even though it's not getting rid of the property tax. I'd love for there to be an amendment that would have taken that property tax inclusion out of it, because that would have been a backdoor way of completely eliminating property tax, or at least restricting property tax to the original purchase price of the property. But they didn't do that. So this is one on balance, kind of hold your nose, and I think that we should vote for. It's been court tested, all that kind of stuff. Proposition 3, constitutional amendment requiring the denial of bail under certain circumstances to persons accused of certain felony offenses punishable as a felony. This is a response to the cities that are run blue in the state of Texas that keep releasing criminals after they've been arrested. They release them on no bail. Okay, so this is a perceived fix to that. I agree totally with Kristen on this one. What you need to look at is that is a local issue, having bad judges in the city of Houston and in San Antonio and Dallas primarily, and taking away people's rights to bail. And if you go back and read the underlying legislation, it includes things like domestic disputes, which, those can be all over the map in terms of where the evidence is when somebody might get arrested. And to me, this goes way too far in taking away individual liberties. Even if you wish the Harris County judges were better than they are, this really doesn't stop the Harris County judges from turning criminals loose either. It still gives the judges discretion. So to me, this is just a power grab for the government. It takes away individual liberty. I would vote no on it. Let me note one other thing. If you look up here in the upper right, you may have been wondering what those targets are all about. Those targets give you a graphic on how the other groups that I looked at and helped inform my decision voted. So I'm 1/4 of that target. The other 3 groups are the other 3. So 3 out of 4 of the groups are actually against this as well.
Was
So we weren't actually unanimous on very many. Onward, 7 minutes left. I'm hurrying, Dale. I'm on 4. Constitutional amendment to dedicate a portion of the revenue derived from state sales and use taxes. Listen to that. Doesn't that sound innocuous? Just a portion of the sales tax. It doesn't say anything about $1 billion annually, does it? I don't think it says that on the wording of the resolution. To the Texas Water Fund and provide the allocation and use of that revenue. Again, everybody's heard about the water project. It got passed last term, actually. It's already been funded to what, $3 billion, I think, was the initial seed money, if I remember right. Now they're basically saying, let's give it another $1 billion every single year. Well, what happens if, let's say, I don't know, oil prices go down and Midland, Odessa stops pumping as much oil and gas? What happens to that sales tax revenue? Well, it's going to go down too, because it's going to put Texas into a recession. But you know what this says? These guys are protected. They have to keep laying their water pipelines no matter what. Now, I'm not against water pipelines per se if it's really needed, but as a director of the Regional Water Authority, there is an enormous amount of waste going on in these water projects. And it's almost impossible to shut down. So this one clearly and permanently grows government. It's an easy no for me. Number 5, constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to exempt from property taxation tangible personal property consisting of animal feed held by the owner of property for sale. Does this one sound like maybe a lobbyist bill? Maybe. It's one of these carve-out bills that applies to a very, very tiny portion of the population. Now, I wish that they would do something like this for everyone. But whenever they do something like this, it is truly a zero-sum game. If your neighbor doesn't pay as much property tax, you pay more. And it's really not any more complicated than that. So unless it's really broad or just a spectacularly good reason to do it, I would vote no on anything that even smacks of this. And this one, again, was 3 out of 4 votes. Proposition 6, the constitutional amendment prohibiting the legislature from enacting a law imposing an occupation tax on certain entities, basically to sell securities. Now, what's this one all about? Texas just opened a Dallas branch of the New York Stock Exchange. And what this says is we can't tax stockbrokers or the transactions in any way whatsoever. For example, I have to pay a $50 fee to be an engineer, call myself an engineer. Well, this says a broker can't be charged to be a broker, basically. Okay? And again, it's one of these carve-outs. I know they're trying to make the Dallas Exchange competitive with the New York Exchange, but I'm sorry, I'm not interested in funding that kind of an effort, because I still have to pay my engineering fees. We have fees all over the state. Things like, I don't know if it's been rescinded, maybe it has by now, but things like hairdressers, barbers, plumbers, electricians. I mean, I'm not saying there shouldn't be any standards for these groups at all, but they've all got to pay fees. And to take these guys that are potentially dealing with hundreds or thousands or millions of times as much money, and to make them immune effectively compared to a plumber or electrician or even an engineer, to me that just doesn't make sense. And again, it's an example of a lobbyist bill. And the lobbyists may in fact be the big 3. I don't know, I can't tell you who the lobbyists are, but somebody powerful wanted this. But the people are more powerful. Prop 7, the constitutional amendment authorizing, this is another long one, legislature to provide for an exemption from property taxes of all or part of the market value of the resident homestead of the surviving spouse of a veteran who died as a result of a condition or disease that is presumed under federal law to have been service-connected. And where's Bob Bagley? Is he still here? There he is. Bob probably knows more about this kind of thing than anybody because he's 100% disabled, as I understand it. But this is one of those that effectively gives the politicians running for re-election something to brag on that they did for our veterans. Nobody's against veterans. And this is one of those that affects about 8 people in the whole state. And, you know, it sounds good. It sounds compassionate. I mean, to some extent, I would agree with all of that. Should it be a Texas constitutional amendment? If it's only affecting a relative handful of people, I think we can handle that in better ways. It doesn't become a constitutional sort of thing. And Bob, I respect the heck out of you. I hope that's not disagreeing with your opinion.
No, I'm 100%. I mean, we're not doing that for first responders.
Right.
And they're in the same field as far as I'm concerned. The best thing that we could have for a constitutional amendment for ad valorem is to get rid of it.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. But see, if this passes, then the politicians running for re-election can say, we're working on it. We got rid of property taxes for this group. Well, it's not a very big group. Does it really matter? A very reluctant no. This is just not the best way to handle things like this. Proposition 8, constitutional amendment to prohibit the legislature from imposing death taxes applicable to a decedent's property or the transfer of an estate, et cetera, et cetera. That one's clearly a good one. I just went through, handling an estate. You don't want the government stepping in, having some kind of death tax. And this is a preemptive strike against that. Constitutional number 9, constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to exempt from ad valorem property taxes a portion of the market value of tangible personal property, let that sink in, a portion of the market value of tangible personal property a person owns that is held for or used for the production of income. Okay, yeah, that's a mouthful. Let me tell you what this one's all about, and while this may seem like it might contradict the principles a bit that I've been talking about so far, I am completely in favor of this, and for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's a very broad applicability, particularly in today's economy, where a lot of people are working from home, either their entire job or part of their job. Strictly speaking, under property tax laws today, you could be getting a tax bill on a home printer or your computer or some machinery you may be using to crank something out as a home business. That has historically been thought of as an uncollectible tax. It's an enforcement kind of a deal. And to me, what this does is it basically cleans up that problem with property taxes and just exempts all that stuff, just carte blanche. So I would say vote yes for this one. And it does apply to everybody if you've got a home-based business type of thing, which of course is much more common today. Prop 10, that was 3 out of 4 as well. Prop 10, this one was a 50-50 split. The constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to provide for a temporary exemption from ad valorem taxation of the appraised value of an improvement to a resident homestead that is completely destroyed, by a fire. That sounds like a great thing to do. I mean, you can't imagine that you have to write a constitutional amendment to do this, right? 2 reasons basically that I am against this one. Fairly reluctant. I'm still compassionate about it. But first of all, it's a local issue. It's fundamentally not a statewide issue. The second thing is it's also not applicable to very many cases statewide. I did some research on this just today to kind of tighten up some facts that I was missing. And it turns out that unless there's a major Bastrop style forest fire, the average number of residences that are destroyed by fire each year is 10 to 12. That's it, statewide. Okay. What's that?
What about floods?
Well, I think that's up here, yeah. Why not other disasters? And that's kind of like the veteran's widow thing. It's why is it only fires and not all these other ways that a house can be destroyed? We had 2 trees come down in Hurricane Harvey that landed on our house. Well, it didn't destroy the whole thing, fortunately. It was relatively minor damage, but in the scheme of things, but we had houses in our neighborhood that were absolutely destroyed. This wouldn't have affected them. And ultimately, again, this is a local appraisal board kind of issue. It's not really a statewide issue, in my opinion. Again, it's not a bad idea, but I don't think it raises to the level of a constitutional amendment. Prop 11, I'm running out of time. Okay, I got 7 to go. Okay. Prop 11, constitutional amendment authorizing the legislature to increase the amount of exemption from taxation by a school district of the market value of the residence homestead of a person who is elderly or disabled. Now, I hate being called elderly, but I'm going to take an extra $50,000 in exemption. Okay, I'm glad to have it. I wish it was for everyone, but what this is dealing with is the issue that you hear every single session, and that is that seniors are being run out of their homes by high property taxes. And the seniors, for the most part, are on fixed incomes. Whether it's a really good fixed income or whether it's a low fixed income, it is a fixed income. And so the more to me, the elimination of property taxes, not just because I'm a senior now, but the elimination of property taxes is a far more critical issue for seniors than it is for the average population, if you will. It's still radically needed for the general population, but for the seniors, it's particularly critical. So I'm going to hold my nose and vote yes. So it's not for everybody, but on balance, I still think this is a good one. This was split 50-50. This one's 3/4. Constitutional amendment regarding the membership of the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. I won't read through this whole thing, but the problem is the State Commission on Judicial Conduct is an absolute train wreck right now. And it should be changed. I'm not sure this is the right solution. Part of the problem with this, I think I put it up there, is that it gives more appointment power to the governor. In my own personal opinion, is governors have too much appointment power already. But this board is broken, and this is a way that got through the legislature to potentially fix it. And if it doesn't work in another 2 or 4 years, maybe we'll come back with a different solution. This is the only thing on the table right now to try to fix it. And so there's effectively, the current board doesn't do anything to bad judges. And so this is a way to potentially get that fixed. So I would say yes. I do say that this is a squishy yes, because it does entail a bit of concentration of power, and I'm against concentrated power generally. Proposition 13, constitutional amendment to increase the amount of the exemption of resident homesteads from property tax taxation by a school district from $100,000 to $140,000. So this applies to everybody. So I'm for this one. It's not eliminating property taxes, but it's getting one step closer to that goal. And you know, if they did it in 3 more terms and they did it entirely by exemptions, I'd be okay with that. But you got to remember that if you go back to the original Texas Constitution, back to your constitutional issues, the way the property tax homestead exemption was structured was it eliminated 100% of property taxes from your homestead, or if you lived in a city, from your small business. And because most people lived on top of their businesses back then. And it's not a discount coupon. It's not Kohl's Cash. It should be a complete exemption from property taxes. Now, I don't like property taxes anyway, but certainly homesteads should not be subject to property taxes. So this doesn't get there, but again, I'll take it, warts and all. It's a step in the right direction. Proposition 14, this one was unanimous. Constitutional amendment providing the establishment of the Dementia Prevention and Research Institute. Who could be against studying that? Establishing the Dementia Prevention and Research Fund. Does that grow government a little? To provide money for research on prevention and treatment of dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and related disorders, and transferring to that fund, how much? $3 billion. $3 billion. Now, obviously, this has problems with growing government. I would be stunned if anything positive ever came out of this. It's CDC on steroids kind of thing. The only thing I could maybe draw an analogy to, if y'all remember several terms ago, and help me out, I don't remember which term it was, but there were 2 bills that related to mental health. And the grassroots conservatives were against them, in part because they were going to send about $500 million every single year to academia on mental health issues, to study mental health. Okay? We succeeded in voting down one of them, succeeded in the legislature voting it down. And what happened about 2 days later?
Came back.
It came back as what I consider to be an unconstitutional amendment to another bill. And that was basically because somebody highly ranked wanted it back.
Yeah.
And
They never do it that way.
Huh?
That never happens.
Of course not.
But they had to find a way.
They had to find a way. And so it was just cobbled on this other bill. And so it sent $500 million a year to academia now, to study mental health. Well, guess what started the next year? You had all these experts in mental health in academia that started promoting the LGBT agenda. And they were the experts now because we were paying them to research all this stuff. To me, this doesn't, it's not as obvious this would be used in that bad of a fashion, but $3 billion is 1% of the budget. And I just can't imagine that would be money well spent.
Well, and nowadays mental health is a critical epidemic, all because of
Well, yeah, arguably it's gotten worse, because of these experts. Anyway, there's a lot of reasons here. It's not really clear who benefits. My guess is that's going to be academia again, only it's $3 billion this time. Bottom line is this is a zero-sum game. If it takes money and puts it into a government program, that takes money out of your family's pocket. And it's not really any more complicated than that. Almost done, so I got a few more minutes. And that one, notice all 4 groups that I was working with said no on this one. And anyway. Proposition 15, constitutional amendment affirming parents are the primary decision makers for the children. This is one we slightly disagree on. It's kind of a no-brainer, I think, mostly, and I had the mostly in there before I talked to Kristen on it. The issue on the compelling state interest, is that the term? Is what if you have really bad or absent parents, or let's say they want to gender transition their child? Okay, is that a compelling state interest to prevent them from doing that? And that's a topic of a lot of debate on a lot of different bills. And I'm all for parental rights, but some of the parents they need reining in. And we've all seen that. So anyway, net, I view that this protects parents' rights with possible exceptions. And let's see, how can I phrase this? What would happen if this went out on November 7th, is it, or 5th, and this gets voted down? what would the left and the Democrats and the media, what would they say? The state has better right to your child than parents do. I mean, that's the way they would interpret it, that's the way they would spin it.
That's the way they see it now.
Well, good point, good point. Anyway, moving on, almost there. Proposition 16, constitutional amendment clarifying a voter must be a United States citizen. It's redundant. I think Kristen mentioned it might have been redundant. It's a good idea. Even if it is redundant, I'll go ahead and vote yes on this one. Just bells and whistles kind of thing. It is already in the Texas Constitution. We really shouldn't need this, but if they want to make it stronger, I'm good with that. And kind of my first point was it's preemptive in nature. Think about what's happened in California. Unfortunately, a lot of our legislature does things that are based on other states. Sometimes that's good. Sometimes they could be a little more creative. Proposition 17, the last one. It's okay if you cheer for that. The constitutional amendment to authorize the legislature to provide for an exemption from property taxes of the amount of market value of real property located in a county that borders the United Mexican states that arises from the installation or construction of property of border security infrastructure and related improvements. Now, I'll be honest, I had this a no initially, in part because it was just so convoluted and, what the heck does this mean? And it's still murky as to exactly what it means, even after studying the underlying legislation. But what it boils down to is if the federal government or the state or even the individual puts up, let's say, a wall to minimize immigration or illegal immigration, to improve border security, that could be $1 million a mile or more, and for a big ranch, that could be a pretty hefty improvement. Well, what this says is that it's possible, it's not in the law already, but it's possible that the legislature could exempt that federal or state or even personal landowner from having to pay property taxes on that improvement that was for border security. And that's one that kind of violates some of my basic principles, but this one makes sense. And you have to do it with a constitutional amendment if you're going to do it at all, because of the way the Constitution has no carve-outs for property taxes. That's why all of these special things on various groups getting breaks, that's why they're always constitutional amendments. Because fundamentally, the Texas Constitution says you can't do that. So we do an amendment that says you can do it anyway. Go figure. Okay. So I'm going to vote yes reluctantly on this one. Yes?
The way I'm reading it is, it seems to exempt the whole property, not just the improvements.
It's gray. If you read the actual legislation, it's specifically talking about the improvement, but there's other parts that are gray in it that it's like who decides? And who decides what, if the federal government spends $1 million a mile on a fence, well, is that really $1 million improvement to that property owner's land, or is it really government waste mostly, and it's really just a $100,000 improvement? All of that kind of stuff is not spelled out in the bill. So, well, but it could be abused, just like lots of things. Yeah, and it probably will be in some cases. I mean, that's just the nature of laws. Okay, so here's a matrix of how all the groups kind of stack up. This is really just a different version of what you've got. I did put a consensus line on here that if 3 out of the 4 groups, including myself, I'm not a group, individual, but if 3 of the 4 agreed, then I put the consensus number, I left it blank if it was a 2 and 2 kind of thing. Closing thoughts. Fundamentally, everybody's got to keep this front and center every time we look at any of this stuff. Government does not have a greater right to your family's resources than you do. We've got to keep that front and center. I mean, income taxes, property taxes, sales taxes, excise taxes, assorted fees. Depending on which income group you're in, you're approaching 35, 40, 50% of everything you make after tax going to taxes, to government. And you just can't keep raising that forever. I mean, quite obviously. I mentioned this a couple of times, but all proposed tax increases are zero-sum games. If the government gets more, your family gets less. And it's really, really that simple. I don't care how good the idea is. If you wouldn't want to personally, out of your pocket, go fund that, which you're free to do, then vote no on anything like that. I was reading a deal just yesterday, I think, on Davy Crockett. And he was in Congress before he came to Texas to fight in the Alamo. And he real famously gave a speech. They were trying to provide money for a widow of the War of 1812, and Congress was going to give this widow a pension. And he basically said, it's not our money to give. And then he followed that up with, I'm not a rich man, I'm a poor man, and I would be more than happy to give a week of my wages if other people in this room will do the same thing to this lady, but we shouldn't do it out of public money.
That's great.
And yeah, it's a pretty good way to think about it. Other thing about government spending, and a lot of people don't understand this, is that with economics, there's different industries that do better or worse things for the economy. And housing's in deep bananas right now. Housing's not doing well at all. And that's one of the better things for our economy. And the way economists, and I don't have economists up on a pedestal, but far from it. But economists rate different functions with what they call a multiplier effect. So if you spend $1 on building a house, what kind of ripple effect does that have through the economy? As people buy the house, as they buy furniture, as they buy pictures to put on the wall, as they buy appliances, as they buy lawnmowers, whatever it may be, there's this ripple effect where the money gets spent multiple times. And it's not just the price of that house. And different industries have different multiplier effects. A really high multiplier effect would be 2 or 3. Really low one would be 1.0, meaning it really was neutral. Guess what government multiplier effect is? Well, I wouldn't say it's negative, but the way the equations work, it's about 0.7, 0.8. Meaning for every dollar that is spent by government, it hurts the economy by about 20 or 30 cents on that dollar. So, again, if you've gotten the idea I'm against the growth of government, you probably got the message. Sometimes doing nothing is riskier than trying to do something. I don't want to belabor that point, but a lot of times people think, well, we've got to do something when, say, a tragedy happens. Well, sometimes doing nothing is riskier. Sometimes it's not. So just keep that in mind. And the last thing, this is the engineer coming out in me, no data actually is data. And if you find that you've got a question and the legislative office or the bureaucracy won't answer that for you in a real straightforward and quick manner, or let's say you file a public information request and the agency turns around and goes to the Attorney General and complains and says, we don't want to respond to this citizen, no data is data. You're trying to hide something. Okay, so that's the engineering. And so with that, I'm only 15 to 20 minutes late, so thanks for your patience, and maybe you'll invite me back in another couple of years. And if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you I don't know the answer.
So I try to get some information out to others about the propositions. I'm not a fan about any kind of amendment to anything, it's too big. But this is the first I've heard that what the legislation worded versus what's going to be on our ballot is two separate things. Number one, how can they do that? And number two, what are your actual verbiage to show this to other people? Because that's kind of my responsibility.
Great question. There used to be no regulations on how they worded things on the ballot. And it resulted literally in some cases where the wording on the ballot was exactly backwards of what the underlying amendment did. And so what happened was there were some constitutional amendments passed to make that process more transparent. And I don't know if there's a committee that has to review it or what the details are now. Texas Leg, somebody. Anyway, in most of the legislation, I don't know if it's all of it at this point, the very last section of the legislation will include the actual wording that goes on the ballot now. And that's so that the entire legislature, House and Senate, gets a shot at making sure that is reasonably close to the intent.
Previously, the Secretary of State's office would just come up with some, yeah.
But just teaching in general, whatever the sentence is, the word but, or in some cases unless, the rest of that sentence is actually what you need to pay attention to and not the flowery stuff before it. So that word unless basically negates the front part of that conversation. So you can have the best language in there, but you put the word however, the but, the whatever. That's the part you need to pay attention to.
It's possible, yeah.
Okay.
It's possible. I'm not saying that's always the case. Some of it is that a lot of the legislation, including the amendments, they are written by a group called the Ledge Council. That is basically the staff attorneys for the legislature. And so when they put something in there like except as, as prescribed by law, well, that's most likely related to a previous U.S. or Texas Supreme Court decision. I remember I was trying to get a bill written one time, and I was on the phone with Ledge Counsel, and they said, well, you can't do that because of this. And I said, well, okay, then can we do this? Slightly different. Can't do that because of this. And these were all court cases. Can't do that because of this. Can't do that because of this. Well, I'm an engineer. I just solve problems. And eventually we got to a point, and they said, we can probably do that. So, but their initial inclination, it's easier for them to do, is to just put some of those weasel words into the legislation, and that kind of gets them off the hook. So it's not always an ulterior motive, is what I'm saying. It could be, but not always.
So I'm looking for a constitutional amendment for the May 2026 ballot. You heard any rumors about how we get one on the May ballot?
That's different. Yeah, I haven't heard any rumors yet, but one of the things I did in my former life was chaired the resolutions committee on the SREC. That's where those originate. Okay, and it's not actually May. It's March primaries where they usually show up, but they originate with RPT. And let me give you just a little side story about that. Is it used to be, because RPT was mostly controlled by moderates or worse, that once this was passed, that we could put propositions on the March primary ballot, that it was limited to like 3 or 4. And there was this mantra that, well, the people don't care about these anyway, and if we put more than 3 or 4, they won't look them up, and it's at the end of the ballot, and they won't get to the end of the ballot, and on and on and on. Excuses as to why we couldn't have more than 3 or 4. Well, one of the things that I helped do while I was on SREC, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, was we completely blew that out of the water, and we put as many as, I think, 12 resolutions on in the March proposition period. And the really interesting thing was when we started doing that, and some years was 8, some years was 10 or 12. When we started doing that, the actual amount of votes for those propositions went up. And now they're routinely, if you go back and look at Secretary of State data, the propositions at the very bottom of the ballot get more votes than any of the top of the ballot candidates. So,
Wow, more participation.
yeah, a lot more. Yeah, yeah.
Isn't
But
that-
that would be done through your SREC, basically.
So the second question is, you mentioned municipal debt.
Yes.
If you pay off the entire series, does that make
You
economic sense?
can do that technically once you get past the call period. You can do it. I would tell you that financially that generally doesn't make sense. And it kind of depends on whether you've got more debt and you're going to be getting more debt, et cetera, et cetera. But if you take, let's say, a 30-year bond that you've already been paying on for 15 years, okay? The way they're structured, if you've got 15 years left on it, you've paid the interest or most of the interest up front. And so what's left is mostly principal. So if you pay off that principal, it'll save you some interest, but mostly that's really cheap money out there on the end. So you may have originally had the bonds at 5, 6, 8%, but if you look at it in terms of what's left, you may only be paying 1 or 2% on the money that's left and the interest that's left. So yeah, once you get past the call period, you technically can do it. It's not necessarily a good idea. Unless it's your only debt and you got plenty of excess reserves and you just pay it off and be done with it and operate on a cash basis. And there are at least one MUD that I know in Harris County, but that's what they do. They have zero debt and they do everything, repairs, capital improvements, everything out of just ordinary, yeah, really, really.
That's great.
But I only know of one of them. Yeah, Bob.
I was on the mud board here, Chateau Woods, here in Montgomery County. We had no debt. We've never had a bond. And we've got one of the lowest rates for water and sewer in the county.
It can be done. The flip side of that, and I don't want to bore you with Harris County too much, but we are under the gun regulatory-wise to build this massive pipeline, which resulted in almost $3 billion debt already. We're only about halfway through this build-out. And so we've got another 2 to maybe 5 billion to go before this regulatory required build-out is done. So what does that do to water rates? Well, they're going to go up because you got to pay the interest. Does anybody remember how much of our budget's already paying the interest? 80%. That means if we borrow more money, what happens to our water rates? We got to go up. And in our situation, if we borrow $100 million, that ends up translating into a 25 cent per 1,000 gallon increase in the water rates. 25 cents. Just last month, I voted against it, but we voted to sell another $200 million in debt. So 50 cents per 1,000 water rates is what that's going to cost. 11 months from now, we're scheduled to sell $400 million more. Another $1 in water rates. Okay, so our water rates are creeping up. In about another 3 or 4 or 5 years, they're expected to hit about $9 or $10 per 1,000 gallons. Now, most MUDs have a cost of down around $1 or $2. Okay, plus or minus. Something real peculiar happens when you get around $8 or $9, $10, $11, $12. And at that point, and it doesn't happen where we are right now, for the most part. But when you get up to, let's call it $10 a 1,000, water usage stops being inelastic. Meaning that right now, if water rates are low enough, people just keep water in their yard and they don't really pay attention to what water rates are. But when you get up around $10 a 1,000, ballpark numbers that on an annual basis, that's the size of your property taxes. And what happens is people start not watering their yards. Okay, if you got 80% debt and you got a $10 rate, and people only use half as much water, what happens to what your rate has to do? Yeah, who's the engineer in the group? It doubles, or the accountant. It doubles. So if people, you get into this debt spiral, you get the idea? So we're at $10, people stop using water because they can't afford it. They can't afford to have 2 property taxes. They stop using water, usage goes to half, so we've got to go to $20 a thousand. So what happens at that point? More people start watering less and less and less, maybe even taking shorter showers and things like that. So it goes down another 20%. What happens to those rates? They got to go up accordingly because we got this bond debt. And it's this muni bond debt, and you got to pay interest on those bonds.
Who's making you build that pipeline?
What's that?
Who's making you?
The Texas legislature with a law that was literally passed way back when the Democrats were in charge 50 years ago.
Is that only for Harris County?
Right? It's Harris and Galveston. And some of Fort Bend now. It's kind of crept out. And the group that's in charge of enforcing this is called the Harris-Galveston Subsidence District. They are trying like crazy to get Montgomery County included.
Can you give us more background on that? 50 years ago?
Yep, 50 years ago. What happened, there was a subdivision that was built in Baytown. And the subdivision was on a peninsula, sandy peninsula. It was at the confluence of the Sandy Center Rivers and Buffalo Bayou. Okay? Can't imagine anything going wrong. It only had an elevation of 11 feet above sea level.
Right.
Well, it got flooded in 2 hurricanes. Didn't get flooded by rains or anything like that. It got flooded by the storm surge. Okay, you probably have heard of this. It's in the archives all over the internet. It was called the Brownwood subdivision. Well, it was one of these things, somebody's got to do something.
Yeah.
So they had to identify what they said was the fundamental problem, which in my view, they never did, and it certainly doesn't apply to North Harris County and Montgomery County. They decided that groundwater usage was the problem and it caused subsidence, or Brownwood never would have had a problem.
Oh, wow.
Now, think about what I just told you. It didn't flood because of rains.
Right.
It flooded because of storm surges twice.
Yeah.
Okay, so they didn't really identify the root cause to begin with. There were other factors. It did subside. It's only about 3 or 4 feet above sea level now. There's other factors that cause subsidence. There's oil and gas extraction. In river delta areas, there's ordinary compression of the soils. That's just part of river deltas. I mean, look at New Orleans, look at Venice, Italy, look at any river delta system in the entire world. But the interesting thing about it is if you get out of the river delta system, you don't have subsidence. You can get 3 miles out of central Venice, Italy, and at an elevation of only about 100 feet, they have no subsidence there. Okay? Venice is flooded. So how can groundwater extraction be responsible for sinking Venice more? I mean, there's a lot of things like that don't add up. But the Harris-Galveston Subsidence District was created 50 years ago. We are under threat and it's an appointed board. We are under threat, and you would be if they ever got Montgomery County. We are under threat of them charging us a penalty rate of about $12 a thousand if we don't build these pipelines. And I mean, and the irony to it is right under our feet. This is literally where it has been called the Saudi Arabia of groundwater. We don't have a water shortage here. We do have shortages in Central Texas, North Texas, West Texas, et cetera, but we don't have a groundwater shortage here. And in all likelihood, never will. But we're being forced to convert 80% of our water usage to really nasty Lake Houston water.
Yeah.
And when I say really nasty, it's not necessarily nasty when it gets to your house, but what it means is it's really expensive to clean it up and to pump it uphill a couple hundred feet to get it to your house. You know, it's just a really bad system, and we really need some legislative relief on that. Hint, hint. Yeah, Bob.
He means federal.
Well, yeah, we'll take it wherever we can get it.
My question is, in the 1828 Webster's Dictionary, under the word allodial, at the very end, it gives some information that you don't see on the word allodial in any dictionary. And it says, in England, there are no allodial land, all land being held of the king. But in the United States, most lands are allodial. And that definition stayed in Webster's Dictionary all the way up to the 1850s. And after the Civil War, Wisconsin, my understanding in their state constitution, said all land will be allodial. That would include commercial. That means every share here would not be taxed. No table, no real tax. So I'm just saying, the land we're sitting here on had no taxes. It was an emergency, almost an emergency act to have land taxes in the Republic of Texas because they had no money. It had nothing to do with this should go into perpetuity. They had no money for a navy, no money for an army, nothing. They could not tariff like the Mexicans did or the Spanish. We had allodial titles here under Spanish, and my family has had allodial titles. So, from Mexican land titles. So, that's the reason why Sam Houston, because North Carolina probably never had allodial titles. They paid their taxes to the king, and then the king allotted it to lords. Then another king said, I don't like it, I want it back. And he took all the land back to the colony of North Carolina, and he compensated the lineages of those lords if they were dead. So Tennessee, eastern Tennessee, was cut out part of North Carolina, and they liked the state constitution so much, they just adopted it. So as far as I know, Tennessee never had allodial titles. And of course, Sam Houston come out of the state legislature of Tennessee. So, and it wasn't just Sam Houston, Austin or Houston, capital, did this. And so my question would be, how far are we going to tax Chinese goods with not just tariffs, but inventory tax on just Chinese goods? Are we going to tax communists like they tax us here? That's my question. Value-added tax on Chinese goods. Tax it, tax it, tax it, tax it, just like they tax us. They're feeding off of us.
I like the question. I don't have the answer, but I will add something that, about the bit about they didn't have any other way to raise money, so they picked property taxes away. And of course, like I said earlier, they exempted residential homesteads and small businesses. Sorry about to lose my voice here. But the other thing people don't realize is that if you look at the sales tax, and I've done this study multiple times, only about 40% of the Texas economy is subject to the sales tax. Everything else is what you and I would call loopholes. And I'll give you an example. I'm an engineer. I bill a client $20,000. I don't pay sales tax on that.
Wow.
They don't pay sales tax on that.
Wow.
Okay. If you have a plumber do something for you and you pay them $10,000, actually it's probably $30,000 compared to the engineer now, but you pay them $30,000, you don't pay sales tax on their services or their plumbing equipment that they had to buy to do the job. So those are just a couple of examples. I'm not obviously not against engineers, I'm not against plumbers. But what I'm saying is there's lots of loopholes in the Texas sales tax system. And carve-outs. And the comptroller, I believe it is, puts a report out every 2 years on just how much money is carved out and not subject to it. Well, if you got rid of all those loopholes, you could get rid of property taxes. Now, some of those loopholes are things you might not want to get rid of. Groceries, for example, at least staples. I don't know about junk food, but at least staples. But depending on what you left in on those loopholes, you might have to raise the sales tax 1 or 2, 3% and still get rid of all the property taxes. Now, what if you didn't do anything to the loopholes? What would that do to sales taxes? It's about 6 to 8%. There's different estimates on it. But I don't like the idea of not doing anything to the loopholes. But I would take 6 or 8% sales tax increase in return for getting rid of property taxes.
The loopholes were brought to you by lobbyists and us.
Yeah, exactly. Almost all of them. And you read through these carve-outs, as you call them. I mean, my own favorite is if somebody buys ice, and it turns out that ice is being used by commercial shrimpers to put the shrimp on ice, then they don't pay sales tax on that. Every other crystal ice in the state is taxed, but not if it's used to chill down shrimp. And yeah, they're all lobbyist carve-outs.
Okay.
Okay. That's it. Great. Well, again, thank y'all very much.
I'll pray. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for this being here. We thank you for all that have come. We know there's a lot of volunteer work involved to try to push ahead the conservative values. Please help every person here that does their part, and we're pushing to a better Texas, a better nation also. Thank you for our speaker. Just bless his endeavors, Father. I know he puts a lot of time in. And just help him, Father, in all that he does. I pray for the upcoming elections that we can clean house and get some good conservatives in there and move the agenda forward that we need, Father, instead of all this rigmarole that seems to be happening. But all in all, we want to glorify your name for all that you've done for us, and thank you. In Christ's name we pray these things. Amen.
Okay, I'm going to take opportunity to add to that. Father, we are grateful for the research that has been completed by not only Mark, but also by Kristen, by these other organizations. And we can see there's a lot of diversity of opinions, but also we can see that there's a lot of things that our legislature has put forth before us that we ought to vote against. So give us your direction, give us your wisdom, help us to get the word out. We are going to post these things, but posting them is only part of the job. People have got to read them, people have got to understand them. We pray, Father, that your perfect will be done for each one of these amendments and any others that may come forth out of the special sessions in Jesus' name.
Now, let's stand together and sing our closing. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans, white as foam. God bless America.
don't forget, you can go to our website and, this information will be posted, the speakers, you can watch the video. And so, and I'm gonna have to go home and do a rerun on this because there's a whole lot of information and I wanna get it down. Okay, you are dismissed.